words. The Apache girl cried. "You saw everything. Take responsibility!" The rancher insisted he only helped. The day had started like any other on the wide, sun-baked ranch at the edge of the small town. The sky was a bright, endless blue, and the air carried the faint scent of dust, hay, and dry grass. For the rancher, mornings like these were familiar. He moved through the land with a quiet confidence, checking fences, feeding animals, and making sure everything was in order. Life on the ranch was routine, peaceful in its way. And most of the time no one paid much attention to the comings and goings around the property. On this particular day, however, the ordinary calm was about to change.
A young Apache girl, visiting her cousins in the nearby community, wandered close to the edge of the ranch. She was curious, adventurous, and always asking questions about the world around her.
The ranch fascinated her. The wide open spaces, the animals, and the way the man who owned it seemed to know every inch of it. She had heard stories from her cousins about the rancher, about his careful hands and steady presence, and she was excited to see for herself. The girl moved quietly, careful not to disturb the animals grazing in the pasture or the birds hopping along the fence. Bet. She watched the horses as they grazed, their coats gleaming in the sunlight, and she imagined what it must feel like to ride across the open fields, the wind in her hair. Best. She had always been drawn to nature, to places where the land stretched endlessly, and this ranch, so close yet so different from her own home, held a strange and exciting magic. But as she wandered along the edge of the ranch, she noticed something unusual. At first, it was a faint sound, a clatter of tools, a shout, something that didn't quite fit the normal rhythm of the ranch. Her heart beat faster. She moved closer, careful to stay hidden. And that's when she saw it. Bay. A small incident had occurred, something that could easily have gone unnoticed by anyone else, but she saw it all. A pile of hay had caught on fire in one corner of the barn, small flames licking at the dry wood. The rancher was there, moving quickly, trying to control the situation. He had acted fast, grabbing a bucket of water and throwing it over the flames, but the fire was stubborn. The girl's eyes widened. She understood the danger, knew that one wrong step could cause serious damage. Bleh. She watched as the rancher worked, her mind racing with questions and emotions. She could see that the rancher's intentions were good. He was trying to help, but at the same time, something about the scene felt wrong to her. Maybe it was the way he had left the tools scattered, or the way the fire had started in the first place.
She didn't know exactly what it was, but she felt a strong need to speak out.
She couldn't stay silent, not when she had seen everything. Gathering her courage, she stepped forward.
Her voice trembled, but it was firm. "You saw everything. Take responsibility," she cried.
The words seemed to hang in the air, filled with the weight of truth and urgency. The rancher froze for a moment, surprised by the intensity of her tone. He looked at her, saw the fear, the honesty, and the anger in her eyes. He took a step back, raising his hand slightly as if to calm her. "I only helped," he said. His voice was steady, measured, but there was an edge of defensiveness in it. "I didn't cause this. I tried to stop it." "That's all I did." The girl shook her head, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. She couldn't understand why someone could witness something so clearly and yet refuse to take full responsibility. To her, responsibility meant more than just action. It meant recognizing the consequences, understanding the effect of one's presence and choices. And she knew that by simply standing by and claiming to help, he was avoiding the weight of what had happened. Around them, the ranch seemed to hold its breath. The animals paused, sensing the tension. A horse shifted nervously, and a cow let out a low, uncertain moo. Even the wind seemed quieter, as if waiting to see what would happen next. The girl's family had been nearby, visiting the ranch's outer edge, and they began to approach, sensing that something serious had occurred. Her parents' faces were a mixture of concern and surprise as they looked at her, seeing the urgency and strength in her posture. The rancher, a man known for his calm and careful nature, felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had always believed that helping others was enough, that actions themselves could speak louder than words. But now, faced with the girl's confrontation, he realized that perception mattered just as much as intent. People didn't just see what one did. They saw what one could have done differently, what one could have prevented, and how one responded when confronted with truth. The girl's words echoed in the quiet of the afternoon. Take responsibility. They were simple words, but they carried the weight of courage, clarity, and moral conviction. She wasn't angry for the sake of anger. She was demanding honesty, accountability, and integrity. And in that moment she felt powerful. She understood that seeing something wrong without speaking up made one a part of it, whether intentionally or not. But the rancher looked at her again, his expression softening. He realized that this young girl, though small and seemingly inexperienced in the ways of the world, understood something profound about human responsibility. He could see the fire in her eyes, not the fire that had burned in the barn, but the fire of truth, of principle, of insisting that actions have meaning beyond immediate effect. Bess. Neighbors who had begun to gather around murmured among themselves. Some whispered in support of the girl, nodding at her courage. Others whispered to defend the rancher, pointing to his long history of helping others, of being a steady presence in the community. The rancher, though calm, felt a flicker of unease. He realized that intentions alone did not define one's responsibility. Perception, consequences, and honesty mattered just as much. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the ranch, the girl and the rancher faced each other in quiet tension. Neither spoke for a moment, letting the weight of the situation settle around them. The girl's family moved closer, offering silent support, while the rancher adjusted his stance, considering what had just happened. The events of that afternoon would not be forgotten easily. The girl knew that she had taken the first step in demanding accountability, that she had used her voice to stand for what was right. The rancher understood that actions, even when well-intentioned, needed acknowledgement and reflection. And the community, though silent for now, was already beginning to sense that something meaningful had occurred, a lesson in responsibility, courage, and the power of speaking truth. By the time the evening arrived, painting the ranch in warm shades of orange and gold, the tension had not entirely disappeared, but a sense of understanding had begun to form. The girl and the rancher were no longer simply observer and participant. They were part of a larger story, one that involved choices, perception, and the moral weight of witnessing events as they unfolded. In the quiet of the ranch, as the animals settled for the night and the wind rustled softly through the grass, the girl reflected on what had happened. She felt proud, nervous, and thoughtful all at once. She knew that what she had seen mattered, that her voice mattered, and that even a single moment of courage could ripple outward, affecting the lives of many. And she knew that the rancher, despite his insistence that he had only helped, had also been changed by the encounter, seeing for the first time that good intentions were not always enough to satisfy the demands of truth. The night fell, stars appearing one by one in the dark sky. The ranch grew quiet, but the memory of the afternoon lingered. The girl would carry it with her, as would the rancher, each understanding more about responsibility, honesty, and the delicate balance between action and consequence. And so, the story of that afternoon began, not with fire or fear or blame, but with a simple, powerful cry. You saw everything, take responsibility. The morning after the incident, the small town surrounding the ranch was buzzing quietly but intensely. News of the event had spread faster than anyone could have expected. The young Apache girl's words from the day before, "You saw everything, take responsibility," were whispered from house to house, from one neighbor to another. People remembered the fire in the barn, the sudden panic, and the way the rancher had moved quickly, trying to control it. But now, with the girls' confrontation added into the story, everyone was talking not just about the incident itself, but about the meaning behind it. The community was small, tight-knit, and everyone knew each other. Rumors could travel fast, but so could understanding.
People gathered in small groups near the town square, outside the local market, and along the dusty paths connecting homes. Some shook their heads in sympathy for the girl, feeling proud that someone so young could speak with such courage.
Others frowned, thinking of the rancher, a man who had always been respected for his calm, steady nature and his willingness to lend a hand whenever someone needed help.
The girl's family, meanwhile, were still trying to make sense of the incident.
Her parents were proud of her bravery, yet they were worried about how it might affect her and the rancher. They remembered how difficult it had been for her to step forward, how she had felt the weight of the situation pressing on her tiny shoulders. They knew that speaking truth to an adult, especially a respected rancher, was no small task. And yet, they could see that she had done it with sincerity, care, and courage. The rancher's friends and neighbors had also gathered. Some approached him quietly, expressing concern. "Do you think she was right?" one asked, his voice low. "Or do you think she misunderstood?" The rancher shook his head slowly. He was not angry, but he was thinking deeply. "I tried to help," he said again, more to himself than to anyone else. "I didn't cause the fire. I just acted as best I could. But maybe there's more to think about." He had always believed that intentions mattered most, but now he was beginning to realize that actions alone, no matter how well-meaning, were not enough to satisfy others' expectations of responsibility. Meanwhile, the young girl felt a mixture of relief and continued anxiety. But speaking up had given her a sense of power, but it had also brought attention she wasn't sure she wanted. She noticed the whispers of neighbors, some supportive and some skeptical. She saw the rancher moving calmly among his friends, explaining his actions again and again, and she wondered if they truly understood what she had seen, the small details that only someone watching closely would notice. As the day went on, both the girl and the rancher noticed a subtle shift in how people behaved. Some treated them differently, speaking carefully, looking for signs of anger or guilt. Others gave quiet nods of respect, acknowledging the courage it took to face a difficult situation directly. The incident became more than just a fire or a confrontation. It became a conversation about fairness, honesty, and the way people take responsibility for what they see. The girl's father decided to speak with a few neighbors to clarify what had happened.
He wanted to make sure that the community understood the situation fully and fairly. They spoke slowly, carefully, repeating what the girl had said and describing the events as they had seen them.
They emphasized her courage, her clarity, and the importance of acknowledging what one witnessed. People listened, some nodding, others thoughtful, realizing that the girl's perspective was as important as the rancher's explanation. The rancher, too, began to reflect. He spent time walking the ranch quietly, thinking about the events of the day before. He considered the girl's words and wondered if he had truly understood the full weight of responsibility. He remembered the small moments, the tools left scattered, the fire spreading quickly, and the girl's eyes filled with both fear and determination. Slowly, he began to see that responsibility was more than action. It was also acknowledgement, reflection, and accountability. Neighbors began to gather in small groups near the ranch. Some of the older residents remembered similar incidents from years past and shared their thoughts quietly, speaking of the importance of owning up to mistakes, even small ones. Others told stories of young people in the community who had shown courage, reminding everyone that bravery could come in many forms and that it was often quiet, steady, and persistent. The girl spent part of the day with her cousins, who tried to distract her with games and conversation. but she found her mind returning constantly to the incident. She thought about the rancher, about the fire, and about the way people perceived events differently. First, she realized that courage was not just about speaking up in the moment, it was also about holding steady when others questioned you, when the world seemed uncertain, and when you had to wait for understanding. Her mother sat beside her later in the afternoon and spoke gently.
You did the right thing, she said. You saw what happened, and you spoke your truth.
That matters more than you know. People will remember it. And the rancher. He may not understand it fully yet, but he will. He has to. The rancher, walking along the fence line, noticed a few young neighbors watching him from a distance. Some looked curious, some respectful, some still skeptical. He understood that he was being observed not just for what he did, but for how he would respond now. The weight of being seen. Truly seen was heavy, and he felt it keenly. He had always acted with good intentions, but now he realized that intentions alone were not enough. People needed honesty, acknowledgement, and sometimes apology. By late afternoon, the town had settled into a quieter rhythm, but the incident continued to echo in conversations. People visited the market, spoke at the local church, or walked along dusty paths, each reflecting on what they had seen or heard. The young Apache girl became a quiet symbol of courage, not because she was loud or demanding, but because she had acted with clarity, honesty, and heart. That evening, the rancher finally sat down on the porch of his home, looking out over the fields. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the land. He thought about the fire, the girl's words, and the way neighbors had reacted. But he had realized that the incident was more than just an accident. It was a lesson, one that required him to reflect on what responsibility truly meant. He had acted to help, yes, but he had also been observed, questioned, and held to account. And in that accountability, he saw the chance to grow, to understand that responsibility was not just action, but acknowledgement, honesty, and moral courage. By it. The girl, lying in bed that night, thought about the day, about the whispers in the town, and about the way people had reacted. She felt proud, but she also understood that speaking up was only the beginning. Responsibility was ongoing, requiring patience, clarity, and the willingness to stand firm, even when others disagreed. She thought about the rancher, about how he had moved to stop the fire, and she realized that good intentions were valuable, but they were not enough if left unexamined. By the time night fully fell, the town had quieted, but the echoes of the incident remained. Conversations continued in whispers, in quiet reflections, and in thoughtful glances. The young Apache girl and the rancher had both changed in small but meaningful ways. She had learned about courage, clarity, and the importance of speaking truth. He had learned that being seen and being understood required more than just action. The day ended not with resolution, but with understanding beginning to grow. It was clear that this incident would not be forgotten. It would be discussed in the days to come, reflected upon in quiet moments, and remembered as a lesson in responsibility, integrity, and the importance of standing up for what is right. And so, life on the ranch and in the town continued. But the quiet tension of the previous day remained, a reminder that truth and courage are always noticed, that actions carry consequences beyond the moment, and that even a small voice, when spoken clearly and firmly, can spark reflection and change in those around it. After the initial shock and conversations in the community, the young Apache girl and her family knew that the incident at the ranch could not simply be left to rumors or half-understood stories. They wanted clarity, honesty, and truth, not only for themselves but for the community and for the rancher, whose intentions, they did not doubt, were at least partly good. The girl's father spoke to the family quietly one morning as they gathered for breakfast. "We need to understand exactly what happened," he said. "We saw part of it, but not everything, and other people may have seen things differently. If we are going to speak with certainty, we need to listen carefully." The girl nodded. She had already learned the importance of speaking up, but now she understood that understanding the full picture required more than courage. It required patience, observation, and careful thought. She decided to help her family collect accounts from the people who had been nearby during the incident. Some had been working in the fields, some had been walking along the dusty paths, and some were neighbors who had been visiting.
Each had seen something, even if only a small detail, and those details could help create a complete picture of the events. The first person they spoke to was a neighbor who had been walking her dog near the edge of the ranch.
She remembered the sudden flash of flames near the barn and how quickly the rancher had moved to control it. She described the urgency in his actions and the concern in his face, noting that he had not hesitated for a single moment. She had also seen the young girl standing at the edge of the field shouting at him to take responsibility. The neighbor's eyes softened as she spoke, clearly impressed by the girl's bravery. Pay. Next, they spoke to a young boy who had been riding a bicycle along the nearby road. He had not noticed the fire at first, but he remembered seeing the rancher moving buckets of water and trying to calm a small crowd that had gathered. Bear.
He didn't seem angry, the boy said, but he was working fast. It looked like he wanted to fix things before they got worse.
The girl listened carefully, noticing the small differences in perception. Some saw the rancher as a helper, others as someone who might have caused trouble. As they continued to speak with witnesses, small details began to emerge. One elderly neighbor mentioned that the barn had been old and dry, making it easy for a spark to catch. Another noted that the rancher had left a few tools near the fire accidentally, which could have worsened the situation. The girl and her family began to piece together a timeline. The fire started unexpectedly, the rancher responded quickly, and she had witnessed it all, standing in the middle between shock and the need to speak the truth. The rancher, observing their efforts from a distance, felt a mixture of nervousness and respect. He understood why the girl and her family were speaking with witnesses and gathering information. But at first, he had felt defensive, insisting that he had only helped. But as he listened to the accounts being collected, he began to see that even his best intentions had not created a perfect outcome. Some of his actions had unintended consequences, and even though he had acted to prevent harm, the perception of responsibility remained complex. The girl, meanwhile, grew more confident with each account she heard. She understood now that truth was rarely simple. People saw the same event differently depending on where they stood, how much they knew, and what they expected. And yet, despite these differences, there was a pattern emerging, one that confirmed her view. Witnessing something carries responsibility, whether or not one intends to cause harm. Her family encouraged her to take notes carefully, not to argue with anyone, and to ask questions gently.
"We are not here to accuse anyone," her mother said.
"We are here to understand." The girl nodded, feeling proud of her ability to handle the situation with thoughtfulness and clarity. She realized that courage was only the first step. Wisdom, patience, and listening were just as important. By mid-afternoon, the family had collected accounts from most of the neighbors and workers who had been near the ranch during the incident. They returned home to review their notes, comparing the stories, noting where they agreed and where they differed. Some small disagreements appeared. Minor details about the order of actions, the exact location of the flames, or the way the rancher had moved. But the major points were consistent. The fire had been dangerous. The rancher had acted quickly, and the girl had witnessed everything and spoken up about it. Later that evening, the family decided to visit the rancher. They wanted to speak directly with him about what they had learned, not to confront or accuse, but to share perspectives and seek understanding. The rancher welcomed them, perhaps sensing that this was a crucial moment of reflection for all involved. The girl approached him first, her heart pounding, and spoke with honesty and calm. "We've talked to people who saw what happened," she said. "We understand that you tried to help, but we also see that responsibility is not just about action. It's about understanding consequences and being accountable. We wanted you to know what we learned. The rancher listened quietly, his expression thoughtful. He nodded slowly, realizing that this was not an attack, but an opportunity to see the situation from another perspective. I see, he said finally. I acted quickly to stop the fire, and I thought that was enough.
But I understand that what you are saying is important. Being responsible is more than just reacting. It is about acknowledging the impact of what happened and understanding how others see it.
They spoke for a long time, discussing each detail, each small observation, and each perspective they had gathered. The girl realized that the rancher was not unwilling to accept responsibility. He had simply thought differently about what responsibility meant. Through this dialogue, she learned that communication and understanding were as important as courage in achieving justice and fairness. The conversation also revealed subtle but meaningful changes in both the girl and the rancher. Bath. She became more patient, realizing that understanding the full truth takes time and effort. He became more reflective, realizing that perception and accountability matter as much as intention. Together, through careful listening and honest dialogue, they built a bridge of understanding that went beyond the simple facts of the fire. That night, as the girl lay in bed, she thought about the day's events. She understood that seeking the truth was not always easy. It required courage to speak, patience to listen, and humility to acknowledge that one might not have the full picture. She also realized that responsibility was complex. It was not just about doing the right thing in the moment. It was about reflecting on actions, considering consequences, and being open to dialogue with those affected. The rancher, sitting on his porch later that evening, felt a quiet change within himself. He thought about the fire, about the girl's words, and about the community's response. He realized that while he had acted quickly to help, he had not considered how his actions would be perceived or the weight of responsibility carried by someone who witnessed the incident. He promised himself that moving forward he would approach situations with more awareness, clarity, and openness to accountability. Meanwhile, the community continued to talk quietly among themselves, but now their conversations included a sense of reflection rather than judgment. They discussed the courage of the young girl, the careful actions of the rancher, and the way that understanding and dialogue could prevent conflict and misunderstanding. It was clear to everyone that this incident had become more than just a fire in a barn. It was a lesson in human responsibility, perception, and courage. Over the next few days, the family continued to reflect on the events. The girl wrote in her journal, capturing her thoughts and the perspective she had gathered. She wrote about courage, about speaking truth, and about the importance of understanding multiple sides of a story. She also reflected on the rancher, recognizing that while he had acted with good intentions, he was now learning the deeper meaning of responsibility. By the end of the week, a quiet understanding had developed between the girl and the rancher. They did not always agree, and there were moments of tension and reflection, but they had found common ground in the pursuit of truth and the acknowledgement of responsibility. The fire, once a moment of panic, had become a catalyst for growth, reflection, and stronger bonds within the community. The young Apache girl learned that witnessing an event comes with weight. She learned that courage alone is not enough. It must be paired with observation, patience, and a willingness to listen. The rancher learned that acting with good intentions is valuable, but understanding consequences and being accountable is equally important. And the community learned that truth is rarely simple, but careful attention, reflection, and dialogue can reveal meaning and foster respect. That week ended with a quiet sense of accomplishment for everyone involved. The fire was extinguished, the barn repaired, and life on the ranch returned to its familiar rhythms. Yet the lessons of observation, responsibility, and courage lingered in the hearts and minds of those who had witnessed the events. Conversations continued in homes, at the market, and on dusty paths, but they were now filled with reflection, understanding, and a deeper appreciation for the complexity of human responsibility. In this way, the young Apache girl, the rancher, and the community all grew from the incident. What began as a dangerous and confusing event became a profound lesson in truth, perspective, and the courage to seek understanding. And in the quiet evenings that followed, both the girl and the rancher knew that their journey toward responsibility and accountability had only just begun. The day of the formal conversation arrived with a quiet tension that could be felt even before anyone spoke. The rancher's porch, usually a place of calm and reflection, became the meeting point for the young Apache girl, her family, the rancher, and a few witnesses who had observed the fire incident. Everyone knew that this was more than just a conversation. It was a chance to bring understanding and closure to a situation that had stirred curiosity, concern, and reflection throughout the community. The girl's family arrived first, settling on the grass nearby while keeping an eye on the rancher. The girl herself felt a mixture of nervousness and determination. She remembered the fire, the fear, the way the rancher had acted, and the words that had come to her naturally in the heat of the moment. "You saw everything. Take responsibility." Those words had sparked the attention of the community, and now she had the chance to say them again, more thoughtfully, more clearly, in a calm and deliberate way.
The rancher greeted them warmly, though there was a hint of apprehension in his eyes.
He had spent days reflecting on the incident, listening to the accounts collected by the girl and her family, and thinking about what responsibility really meant.
He understood that good intentions alone could not always explain actions. Perception, consequences, and honesty were equally important. He had prepared himself to listen carefully and to respond honestly, no matter how difficult it might be. Witnesses who had seen parts of the fire also joined the group, including neighbors who had been walking nearby, the young boy on the bicycle, and the elderly neighbor who had noticed the barn's dry condition. Each person settled quietly, sensing the importance of the moment. They were there not to assign blame, but to help ensure that truth and understanding could emerge. Their presence added weight to the conversation and reminded everyone that the incident had affected more than just the girl and the rancher. It had touched the entire community. Breast, her voice clear and steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. She recounted what she had seen, from the small spark that ignited the fire to the rancher's immediate actions and the scattered tools that had complicated matters. She spoke with honesty, making it clear that she was not trying to accuse or shame, but to express her perspective and ensure that responsibility was acknowledged. Bex, she emphasized the importance of recognizing consequences, understanding impact, and being accountable for one's actions. The rancher listened attentively, nodding occasionally. He remembered the events exactly as she described them, and could see the careful observation she had brought to her account. Despair. When she finished, he took a deep breath and spoke. "I understand what you're saying," he said. "I acted quickly to stop the fire, and I thought that was enough. But I see now that there's more to responsibility than just acting. Bay. I also need to consider how my actions are seen, how they affect others, and what I could have done differently."
Her parents nodded approvingly, sensing that progress was being made.
They could see the rancher's sincerity, the careful thought behind his words, and the willingness to reflect. The girl herself felt a quiet relief. She had not spoken to create conflict. She had spoken to bring clarity. And now, seeing the rancher accept that responsibility included reflection, she felt that the conversation was moving in the right direction. The witnesses added their perspectives next. The elderly neighbor spoke first, emphasizing the importance of understanding that accidents happen, even in the best-managed environments, but that acknowledging mistakes or near mistakes is what builds trust and respect. The young boy added that seeing the rancher act quickly was admirable, but noticing small details, like leaving tools in the wrong place, mattered too. Pay. Each perspective helped paint a complete picture of the incident, showing the complexity of responsibility and the subtle ways perception influences judgment. As the conversation continued, tensions occasionally rose. The girl became more passionate when discussing the need for accountability. while the rancher occasionally defended his actions, emphasizing the urgency of the moment and the instinct to help. Yet, through these moments, the dialogue remained respectful, fair. Neither side sought to dominate. Both sought understanding. The adults guided the conversation, ensuring it stayed calm and focused, and the witnesses helped fill in gaps, ensuring that the narrative remained factual and complete. Slowly, a shared understanding began to emerge. The rancher acknowledged that he had acted with good intentions, but recognized that intention alone does not guarantee that consequences will be harmless. The girl recognized that the rancher's immediate response had prevented the fire from causing greater damage. Yes. Together, they found common ground. Action, reflection, and acknowledgement must go hand in hand. Responsibility was not a simple line between right and wrong. It was a continuous balance of intention, perception, and impact. By mid-afternoon, the conversation had become quieter but deeper. The girl and the rancher began speaking directly to one another, exchanging thoughts not only about the fire but about broader lessons on responsibility. The girl shared that she had learned that courage is most meaningful when paired with patience and observation. The rancher admitted that he had learned that good intentions need to be followed by awareness of consequences and honesty and acknowledgement. Both recognized that these lessons applied not only to this incident but to everyday life. Her family observed quietly, proud of the girl's maturity and the rancher's willingness to reflect. They could see that the interaction was teaching everyone involved more than any lecture could. The girl had gained confidence in her voice, understanding that honesty and clarity can change perspectives. The rancher had gained insight into the subtle weight of responsibility, realizing that action alone does not define accountability. The witnesses had gained a model of respectful dialogue, seeing how differences in perspective can be reconciled through calm communication. The conversation also revealed moments of humility and vulnerability. The rancher admitted that he had been initially defensive because he had believed his actions spoke for themselves. The girl admitted that she had been scared to confront him, worried about being dismissed or misunderstood. These moments, far from weakening the dialogue, strengthened it. They reminded everyone that responsibility and understanding are not about perfection but about honesty, reflection, and willingness to engage with difficult truths. As evening approached, the group began to summarize what had been learned. They discussed specific actions, the importance of acknowledging impact, and the broader lessons about courage and responsibility. They spoke about the need to communicate clearly, listen carefully, and reflect honestly.
By the time the sun began to set, casting long golden shadows across the ranch, a quiet sense of closure had emerged.
There were still lessons to be internalized, but the framework for understanding and accountability had been firmly established. The young Apache girl felt a sense of pride and calm. She had spoken truth, listened to others, and participated in a dialogue that brought clarity and understanding. She had realized that courage is not only about facing danger or conflict, but also about engaging thoughtfully with truth and learning from those with different perspectives. The rancher, too, felt a deep sense of respect for the girl. Her observations, questions, and insistence on accountability had prompted him to reflect more deeply than he had in years. He had always considered himself careful and responsible, but now he understood that awareness and acknowledgement were just as crucial as action. By nightfall, the ranch had returned to its quiet rhythm. Animals settled in their pens, and the wind moved gently across the open fields. The girl and her family walked home slowly, discussing what had been learned and reflecting on the lessons of the day. The rancher remained on his porch for a while, watching the stars appear one by one, thinking about the incident and the conversation. He felt a sense of calm he had not anticipated, a quiet satisfaction that came from honest reflection and mutual understanding. The incident, once a source of fear and confusion, had become a moment of growth and insight. The girl had learned that speaking truth requires courage, clarity, and persistence, but also patience and openness. The rancher had learned that acting with good intentions is important, but understanding consequences and acknowledging responsibility is equally vital. The witnesses and the community had learned that dialogue, observation, and reflection are essential tools for resolving conflicts and building trust. Even after the conversation ended, its effects continued to ripple through the small town. People spoke quietly about the incident, reflecting on the courage of the young girl and the willingness of the rancher to engage honestly. Parents used the story to teach their children about responsibility, honesty, and the importance of observing carefully before judging. The young girl became a quiet symbol of integrity, not because she was loud or confrontational, but because she combined courage with clarity and reflection. The rancher, too, changed. He became more mindful in his daily actions, more aware of how others perceived him, and more committed to acknowledging both his successes and mistakes.
The fire had taught him a valuable lesson about responsibility, and the conversation had cemented it.
His reputation in the community remained strong, but now it was enriched by the humility and awareness he had gained through dialogue and reflection. In the days that followed, the community slowly returned to its normal rhythms, but the story of the fire and the conversation remained. It became part of the collective memory, shared in quiet moments, discussed in thoughtful conversations, and remembered as a lesson in courage, accountability, and understanding. The young Apache girl and the rancher, though different in age and experience, had both grown from the incident, discovering that responsibility is never simple but always meaningful when approached with honesty, reflection, and care. The days following the formal conversation at the ranch were calm but filled with quiet reflection. The young Apache girl, her family, and the rancher returned to their routines, but none of them felt quite the same as before. The incident, the fire, and the dialogue had changed something inside them. The girl woke each morning with a sense of purpose, understanding that speaking up for truth and responsibility had real meaning. The rancher moved through his day with a new awareness, noticing small things he might have overlooked before. The placement of tools, the attention given to neighbors, and the way people observed his actions. The girl's parents watched her quietly, noticing subtle changes, but she seemed more confident, more thoughtful, and more patient in the way she spoke and acted. She listened carefully to others, asking questions and clarifying facts before drawing conclusions. Her courage had been undeniable during the confrontation, but now, paired with wisdom and reflection, it became even more powerful. She had learned that responsibility was not just about calling out wrongs, but about understanding the full picture and encouraging others to reflect with honesty. The rancher, too, experienced quiet transformations. He had always been respected in the community, known for his hard work, fairness, and willingness to help others, but now he carried a new sense of accountability, a deeper understanding that even good intentions must be accompanied by reflection and clarity. He noticed the small details of the ranch differently, thinking not just about efficiency or productivity, but also about the impact his actions could have on others, and how responsibility extended beyond immediate results.
The community began to notice these changes as well.
Despair. Neighbors spoke quietly about the young girl's courage, often using her example to encourage children to speak truthfully and act responsibly. They also discussed the rancher's humility and willingness to engage in dialogue, noting how unusual it was to see an adult admit that good intentions alone were sometimes not enough. The incident became more than a story about a fire. It became a lesson about honesty, responsibility, and the power of reflection. One afternoon, the girl walked along the path near the ranch, thinking about the events of the past weeks. She remembered the fire, the panic, the fear in the eyes of the animals, and the intensity of the moment when she had spoken to the rancher. She recalled the words that had come naturally to her, the words that had seemed to carry the weight of the world. "You saw everything. Take responsibility." She smiled softly, realizing how far she had come. Courage was not just about yelling or confronting. It was about speaking truth, listening to others, and standing firm even when the path was uncertain. The rancher, working nearby with his hands in the soil, noticed her presence. He waved, and she waved back. There was an unspoken understanding between them now, a respect that had grown from dialogue, reflection, and shared experience. He had come to see her not only as a young witness, but as someone who had taught him an important lesson about accountability, clarity, and moral courage. For the girl, he had become a figure of fairness and integrity, someone who could change and grow when confronted with honest truth. Over the following days, small acts of responsibility began to take shape. Grasp. The rancher double-checked his equipment, ensured fences were secure, and spent more time explaining procedures to younger helpers on the ranch. He shared lessons he had learned from the incident with the neighbors and workers, emphasizing that good intentions must always be paired with careful attention and acknowledgement of consequences. He spoke gently about the importance of observing details, reflecting honestly, and understanding that responsibility goes beyond the immediate moment.
The young Apache girl continued to visit the ranch occasionally, always watching, always learning.
She began to notice how small gestures could make a big difference. A careful placement of tools, a kind word to a neighbor, and listening attentively to instructions. All these little actions carried meaning. She realized that responsibility was not always dramatic or visible. Often it was quiet, subtle, and consistent. Her parents encouraged her to write about the experience in her journal, capturing both her perspective and the lessons she had learned. She wrote about courage, accountability, observation, and dialogue. She wrote about how she had felt standing in the field, watching the fire and confronting the rancher. She reflected on the importance of patience, careful listening, and speaking truthfully even when it was difficult. By writing, she felt that the lessons were not only preserved for herself but could also be shared with others in the future. The community, meanwhile, began to reflect on how incidents like these could be handled better in the future.
Meetings at the town center included discussions about communication, fairness, and responsibility.
People shared stories of times they had witnessed accidents or disagreements and spoke about the importance of dialogue and clarity. The young Apache girl's courage was often mentioned as an example of how honesty and reflection could create understanding rather than conflict. Even the rancher's peers noticed the changes. Friends who had known him for decades observed how he had become more attentive, thoughtful, and willing to engage in dialogue. They saw him pause to listen before acting, consider perspectives beyond his own, and reflect on how his decisions affected the broader community. And he quietly respected the transformation, understanding that true responsibility often involves humility and growth. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, the young girl walked to the edge of the ranch. She watched the horses grazing, the soft rustle of grass in the wind, and the quiet movements of the rancher as he prepared for the night. She thought about the fire, the confrontation, and the conversations that had followed. She realized that while the incident had been frightening, it had also been a gift. A moment that taught her and everyone involved lessons about courage, honesty, and the importance of reflection. The rancher noticed her presence and walked over. They stood in silence for a few moments, watching the sun sink behind the distant hills. Finally, he spoke.
"I want to thank you," he said quietly. "You taught me more than you know."
You reminded me that being responsible is not just about acting. It's about understanding, reflecting, and acknowledging consequences.
I will carry that with me always. The girl smiled, feeling warmth and pride.
And you taught me too, she replied softly. You showed me that even adults can learn and change.
Courage is important, but listening and reflecting are just as powerful.
That evening, as stars began to appear in the sky, the ranch was quiet but alive with a sense of peace.
The fire had been extinguished, the incident resolved, and understanding had grown. The young Apache girl returned home with her family, her heart full of confidence and insight. She understood that responsibility was a journey, not a single act. and that courage combined with reflection could create meaningful change. The rancher, too, returned to his routines, but he moved with a new awareness. Every action, every decision, carried a sense of careful attention, a reminder that responsibility is about more than good intentions. It is about honesty, acknowledgement, and thoughtful reflection. He shared these lessons quietly with those around him, and over time the community began to see the subtle but important changes in the way he acted and engaged with others. Months later, when people remembered the incident, they did not only recall the fire bay. They remembered the courage of the young Apache girl, the thoughtful reflection of the rancher, and the way dialogue and understanding had turned a frightening moment into a lesson for the entire community. Parents told their children the story. Neighbors used it as an example of accountability, and the girl's voice became a quiet symbol of integrity and moral courage. The young Apache girl herself continued to grow in confidence, wisdom, and understanding. She knew that life would present many challenges and that courage would often be tested in unexpected ways. But she also knew that speaking truthfully, observing carefully, and engaging thoughtfully with others were tools she could rely on. She had learned that responsibility was never simple, but when approached with honesty, reflection, and care, it could inspire understanding and positive change. The rancher, too, had become a model of thoughtful accountability. His neighbors noticed how he paused to reflect before acting, how he engaged respectfully with different perspectives, and how he acknowledged both success and error openly. The lessons of that afternoon and the conversations that followed became part of his daily life, quietly guiding his decisions, interactions, and leadership on the ranch. And so, life continued on the ranch and in the small town, quieter but richer in understanding. The fire had been a moment of fear, the confrontation a moment of courage, and the dialogue a moment of reflection. Together they had created lessons that would last for years, lessons about honesty, accountability, courage, and the power of listening. The young Apache girl and the rancher had both grown from the experience, each carrying new understanding, humility, and insight. They had learned that responsibility is a journey that requires courage, reflection, and communication. They had discovered that even small actions, when paired with honesty and awareness, could make a lasting impact. And they had realized that human understanding, when approached with care and openness, can transform fear, conflict, and confusion into wisdom, respect, and growth. As night fell over the ranch, the stars sparkled brightly above the fields. The wind whispered through the grass, and the animals settled quietly in their pens. Despair. In that stillness, both the young girl and the rancher understood that the lessons of responsibility, courage, and reflection would continue to guide them long after the fire had been extinguished. They had discovered that the true measure of accountability is not just what one does in a moment of crisis, but how one grows, reflects, and learns from it in the days and years to come.